22-year-old Alexander Hayes, heir to the Hayes technology fortune, stood frozen in his dirt-stained overalls as the shocked crowd at the Riverside County Fair livestock auction fell silent at his astronomical $60,000 bid for a struggling local farmer's prize bull. The same farmer who just 3 months earlier had laughed at the spoiled city boy who couldn't tell a heifer from a steer. But before the gavel could fall, the massive exhibition hall doors burst open, and in strode Lawrence Hayes himself, the tech billionaire father who had banned his son from accessing his trust fund until he learned the value of honest work. Now witnessing the unexpected transformation his punishment had created. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer heat shimmered above the asphalt as a gleaming black Bentley wound its way through the dusty back roads of Riverdale County. Inside the climate-controlled luxury of the vehicle, Alexander Hayes slouched in Italian leather seats, his attention fixed on his smartphone as he completed another transaction for his cryptocurrency portfolio. Athletic and conventionally handsome. At 22, with carefully styled dark hair and the casual confidence of someone who had never worried about money, Alex embodied the privileged heir apparent to Hayes Technologies' $78 billion empire. "This is completely unnecessary," he muttered, not bothering to look up as manicured farmland gave way to more modest properties. "I could be closing the Singapore acquisition this week instead of whatever rustic punishment this is supposed to be." Behind the wheel, Giles Harrison, who had served the Hayes family as driver and security for 15 years, made eye contact with Alex in the rearview mirror. "Your father believes this experience will provide perspective, Mr. Alexander." "My father," Alex replied with practiced disdain, "is overreacting to one little misunderstanding." The misunderstanding in question had involved a yacht, 3 social media influencers, and a weekend in Monaco that had made tabloid headlines across Europe, the third such incident in 18 months. What the tabloids hadn't reported was Lawrence Hayes' ultimatum delivered in his penthouse office: "One more public embarrassment and your trust fund access is suspended indefinitely." Alex had laughed it off at the time. Now, staring at the approaching farmland, the reality of his father's resolve was sinking in. The Bentley slowed as they approached a faded wooden sign reading Hartfield Farm, Esther, 1887. A gravel driveway led toward a 2-story farmhouse with a wide front porch, its white paint weathered but well-maintained. Beyond it stood a large red barn, several outbuildings, and fields stretching toward distant tree lines. Nothing about the property suggested luxury or excess. It was functional, practical, and utterly foreign to Alexander's experience. As the car came to a stop in front of the house, a man emerged from the barn. Samuel Hartfield was 62, his frame lean and muscled from decades of physical labor, his face weathered by sun and wind into a topography of deep lines. He wore faded denim overalls over a simple work shirt, a straw hat shading eyes that had seen 40 years of harvests, droughts, triumphs, and heartbreaks. Alex reluctantly exited the vehicle, designer sneakers immediately gathering dust from the driveway. He wore what he considered casual attire, $300 jeans and a simple black t-shirt that had cost more than most people's entire outfits. The disconnect between his appearance and the environment was immediate and jarring. "Mr. Hartfield," Giles greeted the farmer with respectful formality, "thank you for agreeing to this arrangement. Mr. Hayes sends his appreciation." Sam Hartfield nodded once, his expression neutral as he assessed the young man before him. Lawrence explained the situation. 3 months, no special treatment, real work. His voice carried the unhurried cadence of someone who measured words as carefully as seed and rainfall. Giles retrieved 2 modest duffel bags from the trunk. All that. Lawrence Hayes had allowed his son to bring Mr. Hayes was quite specific about the terms, Mr. Alexander. No access to your accounts until September 1st. The monthly stipend will be equivalent to standard farm labor wages. Your return transportation will be arranged at the conclusion of the agreed period. Alex's expression darkened. This is borderline kidnapping. I'm 22, not 12. It's an opportunity, Giles corrected gently, having watched Alex grow from child to man with the complex mixture of affection and concern, common to long-term household staff. Perhaps not one you would have chosen, but an opportunity nonetheless. With the luggage transferred and final instructions delivered, Giles departed, the Bentley's sleek form growing smaller on the horizon until it disappeared completely, leaving Alexander Hayes standing in the unfamiliar quiet of rural America, the safety net of his privileged existence temporarily beyond reach. Sam Hartfield gestured toward the house. Your room's upstairs, first door on the right. Bathrooms shared, dinners at 6 sharp. Without waiting for a response, he turned and headed back toward the barn, clearly expecting Alex to manage his own bags and orientation. The farmhouse interior was clean and functional, with furniture that prioritized durability over style. Family photos lined the walls, generations of Hartfields standing before the same barn, the same fields, tracking a lineage of agricultural commitment across changing eras. Alex noted the conspicuous absence of a cleaning staff, household manager, or any of the support personnel that maintained the invisible infrastructure of his normal life. His assigned bedroom proved startlingly basic: a twin bed with a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, a small desk beneath a window overlooking the eastern fields. No television, no private bathroom, no minibar. The walls were painted a simple off-white, adorned only with a vintage agricultural calendar and a framed county fair ribbon. Alex dropped his bags on the bed with an exaggerated sigh. 3 months in this agrarian time capsule. Perfect. After unpacking his limited wardrobe, discovering with dismay that his father had removed his designer clothing and replaced it with basic items from department stores, Alex ventured outside to explore his new prison. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly as he wandered the property, maintaining a safe distance from the barn where Sam was working. The smell of hay, animals, and earth permeated everything. A small vegetable garden flourished behind the house. Chickens pecked in a fenced yard nearby, and distant cattle grazed in green pastures. Impressive, isn't it? A female voice called from behind him. Alex turned to find a woman in her early 30s watching him with amused assessment. She wore practical work clothes and carried a medical bag. If you're into this sort of thing, he replied with practiced nonchalance. Emma Hartfield, she introduced herself, veterinarian and, unfortunately for you, your second supervisor for the summer, second boss in the prison hierarchy. Noted. Alex's attempt at humor fell flat against Emma's practical demeanor. Prison? Interesting perspective from someone whose punishment is experiencing how most of America actually lives. She gestured toward the house. Dinner's in an hour. Hope you like pot roast. It's what we're having regardless. Dinner that evening introduced Alex to the full Hartfield household dynamic. Emma's no-nonsense manner and practical intelligence were immediately evident as she efficiently served a meal of pot roast, vegetables from the farm's garden, and homemade bread. All without the slightest deference to their wealthy guest. Dad explained why you're here, she said directly, as they ate at the solid oak table that had served Hartfield family meals for decades. Let's be clear, we're not a summer camp, a reality show setting, or a rehabilitation center for rich kids. This is a working farm that's been in our family for 4 generations. We agreed to this arrangement because your father was very generous with the compensation, and we can use the extra hands. Alex picked at his food, unaccustomed to simple Home cooking after years of personal chefs and Michelin-starred restaurants. I assume there's Wi-Fi. I have investments to monitor. Sam and Emma exchanged glances. Internet's in town at the library, Sam replied. Open Tuesday through Saturday, 9 to 5. You can't be serious. Alex stared in genuine disbelief. No internet? How am I supposed to focus on learning something new? Emma suggested with a raised eyebrow. That's rather the point, isn't it? The conversation that followed established the structure that would define Alex's summer exile. Up at 5 a.m., breakfast at 5:30, work assignments beginning at 6, lunch at noon, afternoon chores until dinner, additional evening responsibilities. As needed, Sundays partially off for church, optional and rest. Pay would be $14 per hour, standard for agricultural labor in the region, with room and board deducted as is customary for live-in farmhands. Any questions? Sam asked as he finished outlining what amounted to a complete dismantling of the privileged existence Alexander Hayes had known since birth. Alex leaned back in his chair, summoning the negotiation skills he'd observed in countless boardroom situations. Look, I understand my father has arranged this experience, but surely we can reach a more mutually beneficial arrangement. I have connections, investment insights that could be far more valuable than manual labor. Perhaps, son, Sam interrupted, his tone remaining measured but with a new firmness. Your father didn't send you here to teach us about investments. He sent you here to learn what it means to earn something through effort rather than inheritance. Tomorrow morning you'll help with the dairy cattle. I suggest you get some sleep. 5 a.m. comes mighty early for folks not used to it. That first night, lying on a mattress far less comfortable than the handcrafted Swedish bed he was accustomed to, Alexander Hayes stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and plotted escape scenarios. He could call friends to wire emergency funds, catch a bus to the nearest city, be back in his Manhattan penthouse within 48 hours. He could negotiate directly with the Hartfields, offer future considerations in exchange for falsified reports to his father. His strategic planning was interrupted by unfamiliar sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through nearby trees, the absolute absence of urban ambient noise. No sirens, no traffic, no nightclub bass lines penetrating. Luxury windows. Just the unnerving quiet of rural night and the growing realization that his usual solutions wouldn't apply in this environment. Morning arrived with brutal efficiency, announced by Sam Hartfield's knock at exactly 5 a.m. Still groggy and disoriented, Alex stumbled through getting dressed, opting for his most practical clothing. The kitchen was already active, Emma preparing a substantial breakfast of eggs, bacon, homemade biscuits, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. You'll need the calories, she explained, noting his surprise at the portion size. Farm work burns through energy faster than your body's probably used to. Sam entered from outside, already having completed early morning tasks before most people would have had their first coffee. He assessed Alexander's clothing with a single glance. Those won't last a day. After breakfast, we'll find you something suitable from the spare work clothes. The something suitable turned out to be well-worn overalls, sturdy work boots, and cotton shirts that had seen years of use, all previously belonging to a former farmhand with roughly Alex's build. The indignity of discarding his curated wardrobe for second-hand work clothes ranked high on Alex's rapidly growing list of complaints. These smell like they've been worn by someone else, he protested weakly. They have, Sam confirmed without sympathy. Mike worked here 5 summers before heading to college. Good kid, knew the value of what he earned. The morning's dairy work proved immediately humbling. What seemed straightforward in concept, assisting with milking operations for the farm's small herd of 30 dairy cows, became a comedy of errors in execution. Alex's city-cultivated germophobia, complete unfamiliarity with large animals, and general disconnection from agricultural processes combined to create a perfect storm of incompetence. "You're tensing up. Cows sense that," Sam explained with remarkable patience as Alex failed for the third time to properly attach milking equipment. "Approach calmly. Move deliberately. They're creatures of routine. They know this process better than you do." By mid-morning, Alex's hands were developing blisters despite work gloves, and the realization that this represented just the first few hours of his first day of a 3-month sentence was beginning to sink in with horrifying clarity. "I've reviewed quarterly reports from 17 international divisions in a single morning," he muttered as he awkwardly maneuvered a wheelbarrow loaded with feed. "I've closed 8-figure acquisitions before lunch. I shouldn't be shoveling literal different skills for different situations," Sam interrupted, seeming genuinely unbothered by the manual labor that was breaking his young charge. "Your father built his first computer in a garage, didn't he? Before the mansions and private jets, everyone starts somewhere." The reference to Lawrence Hayes's well-documented origin story, the brilliant engineering student who had built the prototype for what would become Hayes Technologies' first breakthrough product using salvage parts, struck an uncomfortable chord. Alex had heard the garage to billions mythology throughout his childhood, usually as a contrast to his own privileged upbringing. By lunchtime, Alexander was already calculating how many hours remained in his sentence, approximately 2,060, assuming an 8-hour workday. The number seemed impossibly large as he collapsed onto a kitchen chair, his body already protesting the unaccustomed physical demands. "Eat," Emma instructed, placing a substantial sandwich before him. "Your body's adjusting. It gets better." "Does it?" Alex questioned, genuine doubt in his voice. "No," she replied with a slight smile, "but you get stronger." Days blurred into an exhausting routine of physical labor, unlike anything Alexander had experienced. Dairy operations, field maintenance, equipment repair, fence mending. Each task presented new challenges for hands more accustomed to touchscreens than tools. Nights brought bone-deep fatigue that made even the simple twin bed feel luxurious. By comparison, after the first week, Alex made his first escape attempt. During a supply run to town, he slipped away from Sam and made it as far as the bus station, before discovering his credit cards had been completely frozen, not just limited, as he'd been told, but rendered entirely useless. Even his attempt to charm the station clerk into a ticket with promises of future payment failed miserably. "Son, folks around here have heard that line before," the elderly ticket agent explained without malice. "And I got a call from Sam Hartfield, saying you might be stopping by. Said to tell you the afternoon chores still need doing, and Emma's making fried chicken for dinner." The humiliation of being escorted back to the farm by Sam, who had apparently anticipated this exact scenario, proved a turning point. Alexander realized his usual methods of navigating life, money, charm, connections, were ineffective in this environment. If he was going to survive 3 months, he needed to adapt rather than escape. The Hartfields remained patient but uncompromising instructors. Sam's teaching style favored demonstration over lengthy explanation, showing a process, once then expecting attentive learning and reasonable effort toward mastery. Emma's approach included more context, explaining the why behind farm operations while maintaining the same high expectations for performance. "The difference between you and most people who do this work," she observed during his second weekend, "as they repaired an irrigation pump, is that you're choosing it temporarily while they're living it permanently. Remember that when you're feeling sorry for yourself, by the end of his second week, subtle changes had begun. The blisters on Alexander's hands hardened into calluses. Muscles unaccustomed to sustained physical effort adapted, developing a functional strength different from his carefully sculpted gym physique. Morning wake-ups became marginally less painful as his body adjusted to the rhythm of rural life. More significant were the less visible adaptations. His reflexive complaints diminished, replaced by a grudging determination to master tasks he'd initially dismissed as beneath him. The absence of constant digital connectivity, initially perceived as torture, gradually created space for different forms of awareness. The weather patterns that farmers monitored with practiced attention, the subtle changes in animal behavior that signaled health issues or approaching storms. The first meaningful connection formed unexpectedly during the third week. A pregnant cow developed complications during labor, requiring Emma's veterinary intervention. With Sam away delivering hay to a neighboring farm, Alex found himself drafted as emergency assistant. "Hold her head exactly like this," Emma instructed, demonstrating the proper restraint technique. "Talk to her calmly. She's scared and in pain." For 2 hours, Alexander Hayes, whose hands had previously managed stock portfolios and signed acquisition paperwork, helped deliver a calf under Emma's expert guidance. When the newborn finally emerged, its first wobbly steps and the mother's immediate protective response affected him in ways he couldn't have anticipated or articulated. "That was," he began, searching for words. "Life," Emma finished simply. "Not abstractions or numbers on a screen. Actual life happening right in front of you, depending partly on your actions. Different than closing a business deal, isn't it?" That night, Alex sat on the farmhouse porch after dinner, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering twilight. Sam joined him, offering a glass of homemade lemonade as they sat in companionable silence for several minutes. "Your father and I served together," Sam finally said, the unexpected revelation breaking the quiet. "Desert Storm, 1991. He was a communications specialist, smart as they come. I was just a farm boy, serving my country before coming back to take over from my dad." Alex turned in surprise. His father rarely discussed his military service, and the connection to the Hartfields had never been mentioned. "You knew him then, before Hayes Technology?" Sam nodded. "We weren't close friends, different backgrounds and all, but we shared a foxhole for 3 days during a sandstorm. You learn about a man's character in situations like that." He took a sip of lemonade. "When he contacted me about you staying here, it was the first time we'd spoken in nearly 30 years. "Why did he choose your farm specifically?" Alex asked, pieces of the puzzle beginning to rearrange themselves. "He said he wanted you somewhere with no shortcuts, no connections to leverage, nothing to fall back on except what you could learn and earn yourself." Sam's weathered face revealed no judgment, and perhaps he remembered that I don't impress easily, whether it's a tech billionaire or his son. The revelation created a new context for Alex's summer exile, not a random placement, but a deliberate choice by a father who had once known simple circumstances himself. The perspective shift was subtle but significant, planting seeds of curiosity where only resentment had previously grown. As June turned to July, the transformation accelerated. Alexander's competence with farm tasks improved from embarrassing to passable to occasionally proficient. The local feed store clerks stopped staring at his obvious outsider status and began greeting him by name. His designer clothing remained untouched in his duffel bags, the borrowed work clothes now fitting, his daily identity without second thought. Unexpected lessons emerged in unlikely contexts. Agricultural economics revealed itself as complex and precarious, with profit margins so thin that single weather events could determine financial survival. The interconnected nature of rural communities became evident through barn-raising efforts. For a neighbor whose structure had been damaged by lightning, dozens of families arriving with tools and food to complete in a weekend what would have taken months alone. Most surprising was the gradual shift in Alexander's self-perception. Without constant external validation through social media, without the insulating effect of extreme wealth, he began experiencing a different relationship with his own efforts and achievements, successfully repairing the tractor after hours of troubleshooting provided a satisfaction entirely different from the abstract successes of financial transactions. The Riverside County Fair arrived in early August, marking Alex's final month at Hartfield Farm. The annual event represented the agricultural community's social and economic highlight, a showcase for livestock, crops, and rural crafts, with competitions that carried genuine prestige among farming families. Sam had been preparing his prize bull, Thunderhead, for the livestock auction, a massive Black Angus representing 3 generations of careful breeding. This bull could transform someone's herd genetics, he explained as they prepared the animal for transport to the fairgrounds. His bloodline traces back to my grandfather's original stock. At the fairgrounds, Alexander experienced rural community in full expression, families in their finest casual wear, children racing between exhibit halls, farmers engaged in serious discussion of agricultural minutiae that would have seemed incomprehensibly boring to him just months earlier, but now carried recognizable significance. The livestock auction drew substantial crowds to the main exhibition hall, with buyers ranging from local farmers to commercial agricultural operations. Sam had explained that Thunderhead would likely fetch between $12,000 and $15,000, a significant sum for Hartfield Farm's annual income and an essential component of their financial planning. Alex witnessed the respect Sam commanded. Among his peers, handshakes and conversations that acknowledged decades of integrity and agricultural knowledge. He also noticed the subtle hierarchy of rural society, where practical skill and community contribution often outweighed financial status in determining social capital. The auction proceeded efficiently through sheep, goats, and standard cattle, before reaching the premium livestock category, where Thunderhead would be presented. Just before their category, however, Sam received an urgent call from Emma, a serious equipment malfunction at the farm, requiring immediate attention to prevent potential damage to stored hay. "I need to handle this," Sam said with visible frustration. "Thunderhead's up in 20 minutes, and this year's entire profit margin depends on a good sale." "I can stay with him," Alex offered, surprising both himself and Sam with the confidence in his voice. "I know his paperwork, his lineage details. I can represent Hartfield Farm." Sam hesitated, clearly wrestling with the significant financial implications. "You sure? This isn't theoretical. This is real money that affects our actual lives." "I've been paying attention these past months," Alex replied. "I understand what's at stake." With obvious reluctance but pressed by necessity, Sam departed, leaving Alexander Hayes, whose previous agricultural knowledge wouldn't have distinguished a bull from a steer 3 months earlier, responsible for the farm's most valuable asset. When Thunderhead's turn came, Alex led the massive animal into the auction ring with the practiced movements he'd learned through daily livestock handling. The auctioneer highlighted the bull's impressive statistics and bloodline as buyers assessed the animal with critical eyes. Bidding began at $10,000, climbing steadily but slowing as it approached $14,000, the upper range of Sam's expectation, but not the exceptional price the animal's quality warranted. Alex noted with growing concern that the primary bidders included representatives from Consolidated Agricultural Holdings, a corporate farming operation that had been systematically acquiring struggling family farms throughout the region. Their bidding pattern became clear, pushing prices just high enough to strain local family farms attempting to improve their stock, then acquiring premium animals that smaller operations couldn't afford. The strategy concentrated genetic advantages with corporate entities, while keeping independent farms marginally profitable at best. As the bidding stalled at $14,000, with Consolidated's representative poised to acquire Thunderhead, Alexander made a decision that would have been unimaginable months earlier. With clear voice and absolute confidence, he called out, $60,000. The exhibition hall fell silent, all eyes turning toward the young man in worn overalls, whom many had observed transitioning from awkward city boy to capable farm worker over the summer months. The auctioneer, momentarily stunned, recovered his professional rhythm. I have $60,000 from Hartfield Farm. Do I hear 61? The confused murmuring grew as bidders and spectators alike tried to process what appeared to be Hartfield Farm bidding on its own animal. The Consolidated representative conferred urgently with colleagues, clearly recalculating their approach to this unexpected development. In that moment of confusion, the exhibition hall doors swung open dramatically and Lawrence Hayes entered, the billionaire tech CEO whose rare public appearances usually generated media frenzies. Today, he wore simple business casual attire, but his commanding presence was unmistakable as he surveyed the scene before him. His son, standing confidently beside a prize bull, having just placed a bid far beyond the animal's market value. The auctioneer, recognizing the potential implications of the situation, paused the proceedings. Perhaps we need to clarify the bidding status before continuing. Lawrence Hayes approached the auction ring with measured steps, his expression unreadable as he stopped beside his son. The contrast between them had never been more pronounced yet less significant. The tech billionaire in his casual business attire and his son in worn farm clothes, yet standing with matching confidence and purpose. Alexander, Lawrence said simply, his tone revealing neither approval nor condemnation. This is an unexpected development. Alex met his father's gaze directly. I can explain. I believe you can, Lawrence replied. And I suspect it will be the first explanation from you in quite some time that I might actually want to hear. As father and son faced each other across a divide far greater than physical distance, the transformation that a simple farm had wrought in a privileged heir became evident to everyone present. A transformation that would ultimately redirect not just one life, but the future of an entire rural community fighting for its survival against corporate consolidation. The auctioneer's gavel remained suspended, the final outcome unresolved, as 3 months of hard lessons, gradual growth and unexpected connection converged in a moment that would define not just a summer of forced labor, but the man Alexander Hayes would choose to become. A tense silence hung over the Riverside County Fair exhibition hall as Lawrence Hayes and his son stood face to face beside Thunderhead, the prize bull whose astronomical bid price had frozen the proceedings. The auctioneer remained poised, gavel suspended, as the crowd watched the unfolding drama with collective fascination, a real-life soap opera playing out against the backdrop of what should have been a routine livestock auction. Lawrence Hayes studied his son with the careful assessment that had made him legendary in corporate boardrooms, taking in the worn overalls, the calloused hands, the newfound confidence in Alexander's posture. Whatever he had expected to find when checking on his son's progress, this public declaration through an inexplicable bid clearly hadn't been it. Perhaps we should step outside, Lawrence suggested quietly, his voice pitched for Alex's ears alone, unless you'd prefer to conduct family business in front of an audience. Alex nodded, turning to the auctioneer. I request a brief pause in the bidding to confer with my associate. The formal language and professional demeanor, so at odds with the Alexander Hayes who had arrived at Hartfield Farm 2 months earlier, caused Lawrence's eyebrow to lift slightly as they made their way through the parting crowd toward a side exit. Behind them, the auctioneer announced a 10-minute recess, prompting a buzz of speculation throughout the exhibition hall. In the relative privacy of a service corridor, father and son faced each other directly. The physical contrast between them was striking. Lawrence in tailored business casual attire that somehow managed to project both relaxed confidence and unmistakable authority. Alexander in farm clothes that bore the honest stains of agricultural labor, yet carried them with unexpected dignity. $60,000, Lawrence began, his tone neutral. That's approximately 4 times the market value for even exceptional breeding stock. Care to explain why you're bidding on an animal that already belongs to the Hartfields? I'm not, Alex replied with newfound directness. I'm blocking a corporate takeover strategy that would devastate 30 family farms, including the Hartfields. Lawrence's expression shifted subtly, surprise briefly replacing his careful neutrality before professional composure reasserted itself. I'm listening. Alex explained what he had observed over the past weeks, how Consolidated Agricultural Holdings had been systematically acquiring premium breeding stock at prices just beyond what independent farmers could afford, creating a genetic monopoly that would eventually force smaller operations to either purchase breeding access at extortionate rates or sell their increasingly uncompetitive farms. They've already acquired 17 premium bulls and 23 prize heifers across 3 counties, Alex continued, the detailed knowledge flowing with surprising fluency. The pattern is consistent. They target animals with exceptional genetic lines from farms with limited financial reserves, then leverage that genetic advantage to either extract ongoing fees or force property sales. Lawrence listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing as his son outlined the sophisticated predatory strategy he had identified. When Alex finally finished, Lawrence remained silent for several moments, processing not just the information but its source, his formerly self-absorbed son, who had never previously demonstrated interest in economic forces beyond luxury consumption. And the $60,000, Lawrence finally asked. Did Sam authorize that bid? No, Alex admitted. Sam had to return to the farm for an equipment emergency. He authorized me to manage Thunderhead's sale with an expected range of 12 to 15,000. He straightened his shoulders, meeting his father's gaze directly. The decision to bid 60,000 was mine alone. With what funds? Lawrence's question cut to the practical heart of the matter. Your accounts remain frozen, and I'm certain Sam Hartfield doesn't have that kind of liquid capital available. I was buying time, Alex explained, creating confusion in their bidding strategy while I figured out a counter-approach. I didn't expect you to appear mid-auction. A small smile tugged at Lawrence's mouth, perhaps the first genuine one Alex had seen from his father in years. Clearly, though your timing is less coincidental than you might think, I've been receiving Sam's weekly reports on your progress. His message yesterday suggested I might find the results of his rehabilitation program educational if I attended the fair today. Alex processed this information with mixed emotions, surprised that Sam had been providing regular updates, wounded pride at being monitored like a child, but also curiosity about what exactly those reports had contained. Before he could respond, the service door opened and Sam Hartfield himself appeared, slightly out of breath and bearing traces of the emergency repair that had called him away. Lawrence, Sam acknowledged with a nod before turning to Alex. Emma, got the equipment stabilized. What's happening with Thunderhead? The direct question left no room for evasion. I bid $60,000 to block Consolidated from acquiring him, Alex admitted, bracing for the farmer's anger at this unauthorized financial decision. To his surprise, Sam's weathered face creased not with rage, but with something closer to resignation. You noticed their pattern then? You knew, Alex asked, genuinely startled. Most of us older farmers have seen it developing over the past 2 years, Sam confirmed. Consolidated strategy isn't exactly subtle once you understand agricultural economics. But knowing and having the resources to counter it are different matters, which brings us to the practical issue at hand, Lawrence interjected. The auction resumes in minutes with a $60,000 bid on the table that none of you can actually cover. The statement hung between them. The billionaire whose accounts remained fully accessible, the farmer whose entire operation was worth less than the current bid on his prize bull, and the privileged son caught between worlds with a growing understanding of both. "I have a proposition," Alex said suddenly, the confidence in his voice surprising both older men. "But I need both of you to trust me for the next 15 minutes. Sam and Lawrence exchanged glances, the first direct acknowledgement between them of their shared history and the young man who now connected them in unexpected ways. After a moment, both nodded their agreement. "What do you need us to do?" Lawrence asked. "Dad, I need access to $5 million from my trust immediately," Alex stated, the audacious figure causing both men's eyebrows to rise simultaneously. "And Sam, I need your permission to represent Hartfield Farm in a capacity beyond just this auction." Back in the exhibition hall, the crowd had grown during the recess as word spread of the dramatic bid and the appearance of Lawrence Hayes. The heir auctioneer had just called the session back to order when the side door opened, and all three men returned together, presenting a united front that immediately captured the room's attention. "Gentlemen," the auctioneer acknowledged, "have we resolved the status of the current bid?" Alex stepped forward, his posture and voice projecting a confidence that silenced the murmuring crowd. "The bid stands at $60,000 from Hartfield Farm for Lot 37, Thunderhead." The consolidated representative, a sharp-featured man in his 40s whose expensive suit couldn't quite disguise his discomfort in the rural setting, stepped forward. "A point of order. Is Hartfield Farm bidding on its own animal? That would constitute auction manipulation." "A legitimate concern," Alex acknowledged smoothly. "To clarify, I'm Alexander Hayes, acting as authorized agent for the newly established Hayes-Hartfield Agricultural Partnership, a cooperative venture between Hartfield Farm and Hayes Technology Investment Division." The announcement sent a fresh wave of whispers through the crowd as the auctioneer looked toward Sam and Lawrence for confirmation. Both men nodded their agreement, though Sam's expression suggested this was news to him as well. "In that case," the auctioneer continued professionally, "we have a standing bid of $60,000 from the Hayes-Hartfield Partnership. Do I hear 61? The consolidated representative conferred urgently with colleagues via text message before responding. 65,000. Alex smiled slightly. 70,000. 75,000 came the counter, delivered with visible strain. $100,000, Alex stated calmly, triggering audible gasps throughout the hall. The consolidated team huddled in frantic consultation, their body language revealing the unexpected escalation had exceeded their authorization limits. After nearly a minute of tense discussion, their representative reluctantly shook his head. "Going once at $100,000, the auctioneer called, his professional demeanor barely containing his own astonishment at the unprecedented figure for a county fair livestock auction. "Going twice, sold to the Hayes-Hartfield. Partnership for $100,000. The gavel fell with dramatic finality, triggering a storm of conversation throughout the hall. Alex completed the necessary paperwork with practiced efficiency, arranging for Thunderhead to be returned to the Hartfield Farm transport trailer rather than transferred to new ownership, a procedural detail that raised additional questions among onlookers. As they exited the exhibition hall together, Lawrence placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture of physical connection so rare that Alex nearly stumbled in surprise. Mind explaining what just happened in there? And perhaps more importantly, what exactly is the Hayes-Hartfield Agricultural Partnership that I've apparently just funded? I think, Sam interjected with dry humor, we should continue this conversation somewhere less public, unless you want to explain to that gathering crowd of reporters why the Hayes Technology CEO is suddenly investing in livestock. 20 minutes later, the three men sat in a private room at the fairground's VIP hospitality suite, the perks of Lawrence Hayes's presence providing an insulation from the curiosity their auction drama had generated. Coffee and sandwiches sat, mostly untouched, as Alex outlined the strategy he had conceived during those brief minutes in the service corridor. Consolidated's approach depends on monopolizing genetic advantages to control market access, he explained, the complex economic analysis flowing with surprising fluency. They've been acquiring premium breeding stock not for agricultural production, but for artificial insemination services they can license at predatory rates. By controlling access to superior genetics, they create a system where independent farms gradually lose competitive edge in both meat and dairy production quality. Standard vertical integration strategy, Lawrence acknowledged, though unusually patient for corporate agriculture, which typically prefers direct land acquisition. Because direct acquisition faces public resistance and political obstacles, Alex continued, this approach achieves the same outcome, forcing eventual sales while appearing to be simply market forces at work. It's technically legal, but fundamentally predatory. Sam studied Alexander with newfound respect. You figured all this out from watching livestock auctions? From connecting patterns across multiple information sources, Alex corrected. Auction, outcomes, feed store conversations, pricing structures at the co-op, foreclosure notices in the county paper. The individual data points were visible to everyone, but without seeing them as an integrated strategy, they just looked like tough economic conditions. Which brings us to your proposed partnership, Lawrence prompted, his analytical mind already several steps ahead. I assume you're suggesting more than just outbidding Consolidated for a single bull. Alex nodded, leaning forward with the intensity of someone finally connecting disparate pieces of his experience and education. The Hayes-Hartfield Agricultural Partnership could establish a cooperative genetic access program using Thunderhead and other premium breeding stock we acquire to provide affordable artificial insemination services to independent farms throughout the region. He turned to Sam. Hartfield Farm provides the agricultural expertise, operational facilities, and community trust. Hayes Technology provides the capital investment and business infrastructure. Then to his father, it creates a viable counter-strategy to Consolidated's approach, while generating sustainable returns through volume rather than predatory pricing. The room fell silent as both older men processed the proposal, not just its business logic, but the transformation it represented in the young man presenting it. Alexander Hayes, whose previous financial interests had centered entirely on personal enrichment and status symbols, was outlining a complex cooperative business model designed to preserve family farming while generating modest, sustainable returns. It's actually brilliant, Lawrence finally said, genuine admiration evident in his tone, though implementing it would require substantial ongoing commitment beyond today's auction dramatics. I know, Alex acknowledged. That's why I'm prepared to remain involved after my mandated farm term ends. This isn't charity. It's a viable business model that happens to align economic interests with community preservation. Sam Hartfield studied his summer farmhand with the careful assessment of someone who had spent decades judging both livestock and character. You're serious about this? Not just making grand gestures to impress your father? 2 months ago, I wouldn't have cared if Consolidated bought every farm in the county, Alex admitted candidly. But that was before I understood that agricultural economics isn't abstract. It's about real people, real communities, and food systems that affect everyone regardless of wealth. He gestured toward the window, beyond which the fair continued. What I've learned here matters. What happens to places like this matters. The conversation continued for another hour, evolving from concept to framework as Lawrence's business acumen merged with Sam's agricultural knowledge and Alex's surprising synthesis of both worlds. By the time they departed the fairgrounds together, the outline of a genuine partnership had emerged, one that would require substantial work to implement, but contained the seeds of a viable alternative to corporate consolidation. As they reached the parking area where both the Hartfield's truck and Lawrence's waiting car stood, Sam excused himself to check on Thunderhead and the transport arrangements, leaving father and son momentarily alone. "This wasn't what I expected when I sent you to Hartfield Farm," Lawrence admitted, studying his son with new eyes. "I thought you might learn some humility, develop basic work ethic, perhaps gain perspective on privilege. I didn't anticipate this." "Neither did I," Alex acknowledged, "but Sam has a way of teaching lessons you didn't know you needed." Lawrence nodded, a distant expression suggesting memories of his own interactions with the farmer decades earlier. "Some people have that gift." He hesitated, then added more personally, "Your mother would be proud of what I saw today." The rare mention of Alexandra Hayes, who had died when Alex was 14, created a momentary emotional current between them. Lawrence had buried himself in work after her death, while Alex had sought escape through increasingly extravagant privileges. Neither approach had fostered healing or connection. "I've been thinking about her lately," Alex admitted. "Working with the animals, especially. She loved horses, didn't she? I have these fragments of memories, her taking me riding when I was small." "Every Sunday morning," Lawrence confirmed, something softening in his usually guarded expression. She insisted that no matter how busy Hayes' technology became, those hours were sacred family time. "After she died, He trailed off, the uncharacteristic vulnerability clearly uncomfortable. "You built higher walls around the company," Alex finished, "and I used my trust fund to build walls of my own." The moment of genuine connection might have deepened further, but Sam returned with update on transport arrangements and congratulations from numerous farmers who had witnessed the auction. The conversation shifted back to practical matters. Lawrence would have his legal team draft initial partnership documents, Sam would begin outreach to potentially interested farms, and Alex would continue his remaining weeks at Hartfield Farm, while helping develop the operational framework. As Alex climbed into the Hartfield's truck for the return journey, leaving his father to the executive car, waiting to return him to his corporate obligations, both men recognized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The summer punishment had yielded unexpected fruits for both Hayes' men, giving Alexander purpose beyond privilege, and giving Lawrence a glimpse of the man his son might become when challenged rather than indulged. Back at Hartfield Farm that evening, news of the auction drama and the nascent partnership had already spread through the rural grapevine. Emma greeted them with equal parts amusement and skepticism as they recounted the day's events over a simple dinner of roast chicken and garden vegetables. "So you're telling me," she summarized with characteristic directness, "that Wall Street's favorite party boy is now the architect of a cooperative agricultural genetics program. Forgive me if I reserve judgment until I see implementation." "Fair enough," Alex acknowledged, the defensive pride that would have characterized his response months earlier notably absent. "Though I'd appreciate your input on the veterinary services component when we reach that stage of planning." Emma studied him thoughtfully, noting the genuine request for professional collaboration rather than the perfunctory courtesy he might have offered earlier. I'll review whatever you develop. I have some thoughts on mobile testing capabilities that might be relevant. Later that evening, as darkness settled over the farm and the day's events receded into contemplative quiet, Alex found himself drawn to the porch where he had spent many evenings watching the transition from day to night. The familiar symphony of crickets and distant owls provided background music for his thoughts as he attempted to process the dramatic evolution of his summer sentence. Sam joined him after a while, 2 glasses of home-brewed hard cider in hand. "Quite a day," he observed, settling into the adjacent rocking chair that had been his preferred perch through decades of farm evenings. "I didn't plan any of it," Alex admitted, accepting the offered cider. "When I saw what Consolidated was doing, something just clicked, like all these separate things I've been learning suddenly formed a pattern." "That's because you stopped seeing with entitled eyes and started seeing with responsible ones," Sam replied without judgment. "Your father sent you here hoping you'd develop basic appreciation for work. Instead, you've started developing something more valuable, a vision for how your privilege might become purpose." They rocked in companionable silence for several minutes, the subtle creaking of chair runners against wooden planks creating a metronome for contemplation. In the distance, nighthawks swooped through darkening skies, their distinctive calls punctuating the evening quiet. "Why did you send for my father?" Alex finally asked, the question that had nagged since learning of Sam's message. Sam considered the question, taking a thoughtful sip of cider before responding. "Because I recognized something happening in you that he needed to see firsthand, something that reports and second-hand accounts couldn't capture. And what was that? The difference between humbling someone and helping them find humble purpose," Sam replied. "Your father wanted the first, thought you needed your privilege stripped away to develop character. What you actually needed was to discover how privilege can become responsibility when connected to something larger than yourself." Alex absorbed this insight, recognizing its truth in the evolving relationship with his own wealth and position. What had begun as a punishment, a temporary deprivation of luxury and status, had transformed into something more profound, a growing awareness of how his considerable advantages might serve purposes beyond self-gratification. "I've been thinking about what happens after my sentence ends," he said finally. "The partnership concept is just beginning, and implementing it properly will require ongoing involvement." "You planning to move permanently to Hartfield Farm?" Sam asked with gentle humor. "Emma might have something to say about that." Alex laughed, the sound relaxed and genuine in ways it hadn't been when he first arrived. "No, but I'm considering dividing my time differently, perhaps maintaining a place nearby while still handling my responsibilities with Hayes Technology. There's no reason all that work needs to happen from Manhattan." Sam nodded, understanding the significance of what Alexander was suggesting, not an either-or choice between privileged urban existence and rural agricultural life, but rather a conscious integration of both worlds, each informing and balancing the other. "Your father had to choose," Sam observed. "When he built Hayes Technology, maintaining connection to rural life wasn't viable with the technology and expectations of that era. You have options he didn't, ways to maintain authentic connection to both worlds if you choose." As the conversation drifted to practical considerations of the partnership's development, neither man explicitly acknowledged the deeper transformation occurring, how a summer of enforced labor had evolved into the seedbed for purpose and direction that had previously been absent from Alexander's privileged existence. 3 days later, that evolving purpose faced its first significant test when a sleek corporate helicopter bearing the Consolidated Agricultural Holdings logo landed uninvited on the open field adjacent to the Hartfield farmhouse. 2 men in expensive suits emerged, Marcus Whitfield, Consolidated's Regional Director of Acquisitions, and Jeffrey Palmer, their Chief Legal Officer, requesting a meeting with both Sam Hartfield and Alexander Hayes. Emma spotted the helicopters, approach, and intercepted Alex in the barn, where he was completing morning chores. "Looks like your auction performance got someone's attention," she observed, nodding toward the descending aircraft. "The corporate vultures are circling." Alex straightened from where he'd been repairing a feed trough, wiping his hands on a cloth as he studied the approaching executives. "Interesting. Consolidated typically operates through intermediaries rather than direct corporate contact. Someone's concerned enough to break protocol. Should I call your father?" Emma asked, recognizing the potential significance of the visit. "Not yet," Alex replied with newfound confidence. "Let's see what they want first. Dad taught me that information asymmetry provides negotiating advantage." The unexpected application of corporate strategy to the farm context drew a surprised laugh from Emma. "Just when I think you're becoming a genuine farmhand, you drop MBA jargon." "I contain multitudes," Alex quipped, the literary reference drawing another surprised look. "What? I've been reading the books on your shelves during evenings. Not much else to do without Netflix." As they walked together to meet the arriving executives, Alex felt a curious sense of balance between his worlds. The physical confidence, developed through months of farm labor, merging with the strategic thinking his education and background had provided. For perhaps the first time in his life, neither aspect of his identity seemed to diminish the other. The corporate representatives approached with the practiced cordiality of men accustomed to negotiating assets rather than building relationships. Whitfield, tall and silver-haired, with the smooth confidence of someone who closed difficult deals for a living, extended his hand first. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Hartfield," he greeted them, his gaze lingering with particular interest on Alexander in his work clothes. "Marcus Whitfield, Regional Director for Consolidated. This is Jeffrey Palmer, our Chief Legal Officer. We apologize for the unannounced visit, but recent developments suggested a direct conversation might be beneficial." Sam's response was cool but courteous as he invited them inside, the practiced hospitality of rural culture extending even to unwelcome visitors. In the farmhouse kitchen, a deliberate choice of venue that placed the corporate visitors in the Hartfield's territory rather than neutral ground, the four men sat around the worn oak table where generations of farm business had been conducted. "We'll be direct," Whitfield began once coffee had been served in mismatched mugs that emphasized the setting's unpretentious nature. "The events at the county auction have created unnecessary complications in our regional acquisition strategy. We'd like to propose a resolution that benefits all parties." "I'm listening," Sam replied simply, his weathered face revealing nothing. Whitfield turned his attention primarily toward Alex, correctly identifying him as the architect of their current challenge. "Mr. Hayes, your intervention was impressive. Few would have connected the pattern of our breeding stock acquisitions to our broader regional strategy. It demonstrates the kind of insight that would be valuable within our organization." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Whitfield?" Alex asked with genuine amusement. "We're offering a partnership more substantial than your improvised arrangement with Hartfield Farm," Whitfield corrected smoothly. "Consolidated would be prepared to bring you in as Vice President of Strategic Development, with appropriate compensation and equity participation, while simultaneously offering Mr. Hartfield significantly above market value for his property and breeding stock." Palmer, the attorney, placed a folder on the table. "We've prepared preliminary terms for both offers. The employment package for you, Mr. Hayes, includes base compensation of $3 million annually, plus performance incentives. For Hartfield Farm, we're prepared to offer $12 million, approximately double current market valuation for comparable agricultural properties in this region." Alex glanced at Sam. noting the momentary widening of the farmer's eyes at the figure. $12 million represented a transformative sum for someone who had spent decades operating on the razor-thin margins of modern agriculture. "That's certainly generous," Alex acknowledged, maintaining professional composure while his mind rapidly assessed the strategy behind their approach. "Though I'm curious why Consolidated would value my involvement so highly after just 3 months of agricultural exposure. Your background at Hayes Technology, combined with your demonstrated capacity to identify pattern-based opportunities, makes you uniquely valuable," Whitfield explained. "We're not hiring you for agricultural expertise. We have plenty of that. We're interested in your strategic thinking and, frankly, your family connections." The transparent attempt to leverage the Hayes name and relationships prompted a slight smile from Alex. "At least you're honest about that aspect. And what would happen to Hartfield Farm under your ownership?" Palmer answered this time, his legal precision evident in the carefully worded response. "The property would be integrated into our regional operations portfolio, with certain historical elements potentially preserved for heritage value. Existing structures would be evaluated for repurposing or replacement, depending on operational requirements." "Meaning you'd tear down a family legacy and replace it with corporate efficiency," Sam translated bluntly. "4 generations erased. For quarterly metrics. Agricultural consolidation is an economic reality, Mr. Hartfield," Whitfield countered smoothly. "We're simply offering the opportunity to benefit substantially from the inevitable rather than fighting a losing battle against market forces. $12 million creates generational security for your family, regardless of what happens to the physical property." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, the corporate representatives outlining their vision of regional agricultural transformation while emphasizing the financial benefits for both Sam and Alexander should they choose cooperation over resistance. Their approach was sophisticated, their arguments economically sound, and their offers genuinely substantial by objective market standards. Throughout the discussion, Alex observed both the explicit content and the subtle undercurrents, noting how Whitfield consistently appealed to financial self-interest, while Palmer emphasized legal inevitability. Their coordinated approach revealed a corporate culture that recognized only economic value, viewing community connections and heritage as sentimental obstacles to efficient consolidation. When the Consolidated representatives finally departed, promising to leave their offers open for 2 weeks, while Sam and Alex considered their options, an unexpected quiet settled over the farmhouse kitchen. The corporate helicopter's departure left behind not just detailed financial proposals, but also the weighty reality of choice, the genuine option of substantial wealth in exchange for abandoning the partnership vision still in its fragile early stages. $12 million, Sam finally said, breaking the silence as he stared at the folder on his kitchen table. "More money than this farm will generate in my lifetime, even with perfect harvests and ideal market conditions. It's deliberately calculated to be impossible to refuse on purely economic terms," Alex agreed. "They're offering roughly twice actual market value because they're not buying just land and buildings, they're buying the elimination of potential resistance to their regional strategy." "And you?" Sam asked. $3 million a year plus equity would substantially exceed whatever you might eventually make from our cooperative concept, with considerably less work and immediate prestige." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. An acknowledgement that Alexander Hayes was still navigating his own transformation, still finding the balance between the privileged world he'd come from and the values he'd begun discovering at Hartfield Farm. Alex rose from the table and walked to the window, looking out over fields that had been meaningless backdrop to him 3 months earlier, but now represented complex interconnections of ecology, economy, and community. When he turned back to Sam, His expression held a clarity that would have been unrecognizable in the young man who had first arrived in a chauffeur-driven Bentley. "Their offer confirms we're onto something significant," he said, surprising Sam with his focus on strategic implications rather than financial temptation. "Consolidated wouldn't allocate these resources unless our partnership concept represents genuine threat to their regional consolidation strategy." "That doesn't answer my question," Sam pressed gently. Alex smiled, genuine warmth replacing the practiced charm that had once been his default expression. 3 months ago, I would have taken their offer in a heartbeat. The money, the title, the return to comfortable corporate environments. Today, he gestured toward the fields visible through the window. I've started seeing value in things I can't quantify on a term sheet. The transformation evident in that simple statement, from someone who measured worth exclusively through financial metrics to someone beginning to recognize intangible value, represented the most profound outcome of Alexander's summer sentence. Not the physical toughening or practical skills, but the fundamental shift in how he assessed worth and meaning. The corporate helicopter had barely disappeared over the horizon when Emma returned from the veterinary clinic, immediately sensing the tension lingering in the farmhouse kitchen. She surveyed the scene, Sam staring contemplatively at a folder on the table, Alex standing by the window with unusual stillness, and set down her medical bag with deliberate care. "I'm guessing that wasn't just a social call," she observed, moving to the stove to pour herself coffee from the still warm pot. "What did the suits want?" "To buy us," Sam replied simply, pushing the folder toward his daughter. "Farm, partnership, concept, Alex's strategic thinking, the whole package." Emma scanned the documents, her eyebrows rising as she reached the financial figures. 12 million for the farm, 3 million annually for Alex. They must be seriously concerned about your little partnership idea. Concerned enough to make offers that would be irrational by standard valuation metrics, Alex agreed, turning from the window with renewed focus. "Which confirms my suspicion that their regional strategy depends on comprehensive control of premium genetics. Our cooperative model threatens their entire acquisition framework." Emma studied him with analytical precision, noting the absence of the entitled arrogance that had characterized him upon arrival. In its place stood something more complex, a measured confidence grounded in genuine understanding rather than assumed superiority. "And you're not tempted by their offer?" she asked directly. "VP of Strategic Development sounds more aligned with the Alexander Hayes who showed up here 3 months ago than someone pitching cooperative farming models." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. Emma had watched his transformation with professional detachment, neither fully trusting nor dismissing the changes she'd observed. Now she was probing for the depth and authenticity of that evolution. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have recognized the strategy behind their offer, let alone had the perspective to question it, Alex acknowledged candidly. Back then, I measured success exclusively through wealth accumulation and status markers. He gestured toward the fields, visible through the window. Now, I understand there are some things you can't quantify on a balance sheet, like what happens to communities when farming becomes just another corporate commodity. Pretty words, Emma noted, though her tone had softened slightly. But the Alexander Hayes I met in June was a master of saying whatever suited his immediate purposes. Fair assessment, Alex conceded, with a self-awareness that would have been foreign to him previously. The difference is that June Alex would have taken their offer immediately, then rationalized it as smart business. August Alex sees their offer as confirmation that our alternative model has genuine potential to disrupt predatory practices. Sam, who had been quietly observing this exchange, finally spoke. "It's not just Alex who needs to make a decision here. 12 million would change everything for this farm, for our family's future. The unspoken weight of generational responsibility hung in the air. Hartfield Farm had survived the Dust Bowl, the farm crisis of the 1980s, and countless other agricultural challenges through stubborn perseverance and adaptive strategies. But modern corporate agriculture presented existential threats that individual determination alone couldn't overcome. "Dad, this is your legacy," Emma said gently. "Whatever you decide, I'll support." Sam looked between his daughter and the young man who had arrived as an entitled stranger, but had somehow become integrated into the farm's daily rhythms and future possibilities. "I need time to think," he finally said, rising from the table, with the deliberate movements of someone carrying invisible weight. "Going to walk the north field." After Sam departed, Emma and Alex sat in uncomfortable silence, both recognizing the magnitude of the decision facing the Hartfield family. It wasn't simply a financial calculation, but a referendum on values, legacy, and community connection. Spanning generations. "He might take their offer," Emma finally said, her practical nature addressing the possibility directly. "And he'd have every right to. This farm has extracted physical toll from 3 generations of Hartfields. 12 million would provide security that agricultural markets never have." Alex nodded, understanding the complexity behind Sam's decision. "I wouldn't blame him. The partnership concept is unproven, while Consolidated's offer represents guaranteed financial stability. And if he does sell," Emma pressed, "what happens to your grand partnership vision then?" The question cut to the heart of Alexander's evolving commitment, whether his newfound purpose depended on specific circumstances or reflected deeper transformation. His response would reveal whether the changes were contextual or fundamental. "This concept doesn't depend on this specific property," he replied after thoughtful consideration. "If Sam decides to sell, we'd need to adapt. Perhaps partner with another local farm, modify the implementation approach. The core principle of creating cooperative access to premium genetics would remain viable." Emma studied him with renewed interest, noting the mature, strategic thinking that maintained commitment to principle while demonstrating flexibility regarding implementation. It represented substantial evolution from the rigid entitlement that had characterized his arrival. "You've changed," she acknowledged simply. "I had good teachers," Alex replied with equal simplicity. The conversation might have continued further, but they were interrupted by the arrival of Lawrence Hayes's executive car, the sleek vehicle appearing incongruous against the practical backdrop of farm equipment and weathered outbuildings. Lawrence emerged, looking uncharacteristically casual in khakis and a button-down shirt, still impeccably tailored but distinctly less corporate than his usual attire. "I received concerning intelligence about Consolidated representatives visiting Hartfield Farm," he explained upon entering, his attention immediately focusing on the folder containing their offer. "I see Marcus Whitfield hasn't lost his talent for aggressive acquisition approaches." "You know him?" Alex asked, surprised by his father's familiarity with Consolidated's executive. "We've encountered each other in various corporate contexts," Lawrence confirmed, scanning the documents with practiced efficiency. "Hayes Technology has agricultural technology divisions that occasionally compete with Consolidated's automation subsidiaries. Whitfield has a reputation for identifying strategic vulnerabilities and exploiting them without hesitation. Which explains why they moved so quickly following the auction," Alex observed. "They recognized the partnership concept as a potential disruption to their regional strategy." Lawrence nodded, his expression revealing professional respect for his son's analysis. "Their offer amounts validate your assessment of the situation. These figures substantially exceed standard valuation metrics for both the property and your proposed involvement." "The question," Emma interjected, "is why you're here, Mr. Hayes. This decision ultimately belongs to my father." Lawrence turned his attention to Emma, acknowledging her directness with a slight nod. You're absolutely right, Dr. Hartfield. I'm here because Consolidated's approach suggests they view our nascent partnership as a genuine threat, which confirms its potential viability. I wanted to ensure Sam has complete information before making his decision. The diplomatic response revealed Lawrence's own evolution. The corporate titan, accustomed to control, now recognizing the importance of respecting others' decision-making authority, particularly regarding their own legacies. Before the conversation could continue, Sam returned from his contemplative walk, his weathered face showing the evidence of deep consideration. "Lawrence," he greeted his former foxhole companion with a nod. "Figured you might appear once word of Consolidated's visit reached you. Their interest validates Alexander's assessment," Lawrence replied simply, "though the ultimate decision regarding their offer remains entirely yours." Sam gestured toward the porch. "Walk with me. Some conversations belong outside." As the two older men departed, Alex and Emma were left in a moment of unexpected alignment, both concerned about Sam's decision, yet respecting his right to make it independently. The comfortable silence that developed between them would have been unimaginable during Alex's early days at the farm, when every interaction had been fraught with mutual suspicion and judgment. "For what it's worth," Emma finally said, "I think you've earned my father's respect. Not many people manage that." "High praise coming from you," Alex replied with a genuine smile, "considering you thought I wouldn't last a week without running back to my penthouse." "To be fair, you did try to escape," she reminded him with answering humor. "The bus station incident wasn't exactly a shining moment of commitment." The shared laughter marked another milestone in their evolving relationship, from antagonistic supervisor and reluctant laborer to something approaching mutual respect, perhaps even the beginnings of friendship. The transformation had occurred so gradually that neither had fully marked its progression until this moment of genuine connection. Outside on the porch, a different conversation unfolded between men whose life paths had diverged decades earlier, yet now found themselves unexpectedly reconnected through Alexander. Sam and Lawrence settled into the familiar rocking chairs, the rhythmic creaking providing backdrop to their deliberation. "$12 million is life-changing money," Lawrence acknowledged, addressing the reality directly rather than attempting persuasion. "No one would fault you for accepting." Sam nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant fields that had defined his existence since childhood. "My grandfather paid $4,000 for this property in 1887. Seemed like an impossible sum back then." He gestured toward the folder containing Consolidated's offer. "Now corporate interests offer 3,000 times that amount and consider it a routine transaction." "The economics of scale have changed dramatically," Lawrence agreed. "Individual farms face structural disadvantages that no amount of hard work can fully overcome, which makes their offer logically compelling," Sam continued. "Yet something doesn't sit right about ending 4 generations of history with a corporate transaction, however financially advantageous." Lawrence studied his former military companion thoughtfully. "When we were pinned down in that foxhole during the sandstorm, you told me something I've never forgotten. You said that Hartfields don't measure decisions by what's expedient, but by what leaves the strongest legacy." Sam smiled faintly at the decades-old memory. "I was 22 and full of inherited wisdom I hadn't earned yet." "Perhaps," Lawrence acknowledged, "but those words stayed with me through every major business decision I've made since, sometimes as guidance, sometimes as counterpoint to my own choices." The admission created momentary connection between divergent life paths, the technology visionary whose decisions affected global markets and the farmer whose choices preserved local tradition, each influenced by principles articulated during shared military service decades earlier. "What would you do if this were your legacy?" Sam asked directly. "I can't answer that," Lawrence replied with unexpected humility. "My circumstances have been entirely different. But I can tell you that watching Alexander these past months has forced me to reconsider some of my own definitions of success and purpose. Sam nodded, understanding the subtle shift this represented in their dynamic. Lawrence Hayes, the billionaire CEO, acknowledging limitations to his perspective rather than presuming universal application of his worldview. It marked genuine evolution from the brilliant but sometimes arrogant young communications specialist Sam had known in Desert Storm. "Your son has surprised me," Sam admitted. "When he first arrived, I gave him 2 weeks before he broke. Instead, he's shown capacity for growth I wouldn't have predicted. He's surprised me as well," Lawrence agreed, "though perhaps we both underestimated him by focusing on his privileges rather than his potential." Their conversation continued as afternoon shadows lengthened across the porch. Two men from different worlds finding unexpected common ground in their assessment of Alexander's transformation and the legitimate merits of both Consolidated's offer and the partnership alternative. Unlike the corporate representatives who had framed their proposition exclusively through financial metrics, Lawrence recognized and respected the non-economic factors influencing Sam's decision: the weight of history, community connection, and generational responsibility. When they finally returned inside, they found Alex and Emma deep in conversation about potential modifications to the partnership concept, adjustments that might address various scenarios depending on Sam's decision. Regarding Consolidated's offer, the pragmatic problem-solving approach focused on principles rather than specific implementation details further demonstrated Alexander's evolution from rigid entitlement to adaptable purposefulness. "I've made my decision," Sam announced, drawing their immediate attention. The gravity in his tone acknowledged the significance of the moment, not just for Hartfield Farm, but for all their interconnected futures. "Whatever you've decided, we'll respect it," Alex assured him, the genuine acceptance in his voice marking another step in his personal growth. Sam placed the Consolidated offer folder on the table, his weathered hand resting on it momentarily. Before he spoke, "This offer represents financial security beyond anything my family has known for 4 generations." He paused, his expression thoughtful but determined. "But Hartfields have never defined security solely through financial metrics. True security comes from community resilience, sustainable practices, and systems that benefit more than just ourselves." Emma's eyes widened slightly as the implication became clear. "Dad, are you saying—" "I'm declining their offer," Sam confirmed, "but with conditions regarding our partnership moving forward. If we're going to challenge Consolidated's approach, we need to ensure our alternative truly serves the community, rather than simply creating another exclusionary system." The decision prompted visible relief from Alex, though he quickly refocused on the partnership implications. "What conditions do you have in mind?" Sam outlined his thinking: structural protections ensuring the partnership maintained focus on community benefit rather than maximizing returns, governance mechanisms that preserved agricultural expertise in decision-making, and safeguards against future conversion to purely profit-driven models. The thoughtful requirements revealed deep consideration of how innovative concepts often drift from founding principles without proper structural protections. As the discussion evolved into concrete planning, Lawrence contributed strategic insights regarding organizational structures that could achieve Sam's objectives while maintaining operational viability. Emma's veterinary expertise informed practical implementations for genetic diversification programs that would counter Consolidated's monopolistic approach. Alexander synthesized these diverse perspectives into coherent frameworks that bridged agricultural tradition and innovative business models. The collaborative process, farmer, veterinarian, CEO, and reformed heir working together towards shared purpose, represented exactly the integrative approach their partnership concept proposed for the broader agricultural community. The very dynamic they hoped to foster was manifesting in their planning process, confirming its potential viability. Late that evening, after Lawrence had departed with plans to have his legal team draft partnership documents incorporating Sam's conditions, the Hartfields and Alexander shared a quiet dinner that carried the comfortable familiarity of family gathering rather than employer-employee relationship. The subtle shift felt significant. Alex had arrived as an outsider, serving obligatory sentence, but had gradually become integrated into the farm's daily rhythms and future planning. "What happens when your 3 months end next week?" Emma asked, voicing the question that had remained largely unaddressed during partnership discussions. "Back to Manhattan penthouses and society events?" The question carried no judgment but genuine curiosity about Alexander's intended path forward, now that his father's mandated farm experience was concluding. His response would indicate whether the summer's transformation represented temporary adaptation or fundamental redirection. "My life will necessarily involve elements of both worlds moving forward," Alex acknowledged thoughtfully. "Hayes technology. Responsibilities require corporate presence, while meaningful involvement in our partnership demands continued agricultural connection." Straddling urban corporate culture and rural agricultural community, Sam observed. "Not an easy balance to maintain." "No," Alex agreed. "But perhaps the tension between those worlds is precisely what makes this partnership valuable, creating genuine connection between systems that have become dangerously disconnected." The philosophical observation would have seemed performative. From the Alexander, who had arrived 3 months earlier, now it carried the authentic weight of someone who had experienced both worlds directly and recognized the problematic disconnect between them. "Well, wherever you end up living, you still have chores tomorrow morning," Emma reminded him with practical humor. "Those cows won't milk themselves, regardless of partnership philosophies." The following weeks brought rapid developments as the Hayes-Hartfield Agricultural Partnership took formal shape. Lawrence's legal team created organizational structures that protected founding principles while enabling operational flexibility. Sam's community connections facilitated outreach to independent farms throughout the region, many of which responded with cautious interest to the cooperative genetics access concept. Emma developed protocols for quality monitoring and veterinary oversight that would maintain premium standards while expanding participation. Alexander's role evolved organically, his business education and technological familiarity bridging the gap between agricultural tradition and innovative approaches. The genuine respect he'd earned through months of physical farm labor gave him credibility with skeptical farmers, while his Hayes connections provided access to capital and technological resources unavailable to most agricultural startups. Consolidated. Agricultural holdings responded predictably to their rejected offer, intensifying acquisition efforts throughout the region while spreading strategic doubts about the partnership's viability. Their approach confirmed Alex's initial assessment. The cooperative model represented genuine threat to their consolidation strategy, provoking proportional defensive measures. On Alexander's final official day at Hartfield Farm, exactly 3 months after his chauffeur-driven arrival, the contrast could not have been more pronounced. Instead of a reluctant exile counting hours until liberation, he had become an integrated participant in farm operations and the architect of a cooperative venture with potential regional impact. The physical transformation was equally evident. His body had developed the functional strength of genuine labor, his designer clothes permanently replaced by practical work attire that no longer felt like costume, but simply appropriate equipment for necessary tasks. Most significant was the internal evolution, from someone who measured value exclusively through wealth and status to someone who recognized the complex worth of community resilience, meaningful work, and purposeful enterprise. Not rejection of privilege, but rather its redirection toward constructive application. Sam marked the occasion with characteristic understatement, handing Alex his final paycheck after morning chores were completed. $14 an hour, minus room and board for 91 days, he noted with practical precision. Not exactly the returns you're accustomed to. Alex accepted the modest check with genuine appreciation rather than the disdain such an amount would have previously triggered. "Best investment I've ever made," he replied simply. Their handshake carried the weight of transformed relationship, from reluctant supervisor and entitled laborer to respected partners with shared vision. No dramatic declarations were necessary. The evolution of their interaction spoke more eloquently than explicit acknowledgement could have. Emma's goodbye carried similar understated significance as she handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something to remember your sentence by," she explained, with the dry humor that had eventually become comfortable between them. Inside, Alex found a hand-carved wooden bull, clearly made by local artisan with remarkable attention to anatomical detail. The craftsmanship revealed deep understanding of the animal's structure and movement, capturing in miniature the power and purpose of the livestock that had featured so prominently in his transformation. "It's beautiful," he acknowledged, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness behind the gift, "though I'm not likely to forget any aspect of this summer with or without reminders." "Good," Emma replied simply, "because we're counting on you maintaining perspective even when you're back in boardrooms and penthouses." The subtle challenge acknowledged the genuine progress he'd made, while recognizing the ongoing work required to maintain connection between his privileged position and his newfound understanding of agricultural realities. Emma, ever the pragmatist, was neither dismissing his transformation nor assuming its permanence without continued conscious choice. Lawrence arrived personally to retrieve his son, though the executive car that pulled into the Hartfield driveway carried none of the symbolic separation that had characterized Alexander's arrival. Instead of a chauffeur maintaining professional distance, Lawrence himself stepped out to shake Sam's hand and thank him directly for what he termed the education Hayes technology couldn't provide. As Alexander placed his modest bags in the trunk, containing significantly different contents than when he'd arrived, the physical transition felt secondary to the more fundamental changes that would return with him to his previous environments. The question hanging unspoken was whether those changes would persist when re-immersed in contexts that had previously reinforced entitlement and self-absorption. "Ready to return to civilization?" Lawrence asked as they prepared to depart, the phrasing deliberately echoing the dismissive language Alexander himself might have used 3 months earlier. Alex gazed thoughtfully at the farm that had initially seemed like prison, but had ultimately provided unexpected liberation from limited perspective. "I think I've discovered that civilization takes different forms," he replied, "each with their own wisdom and limitations." The observation, delivered without pretension or performative depth, simply articulated genuine realization, the recognition that meaningful understanding requires experience of diverse contexts rather than assumption of universal principles from limited perspective. As they drove away, Alexander Hayes watched Hartfield Farm recede in the side mirror, the distance growing. Physically, while the influence remained present. Unlike his anticipated departure, counting minutes until liberation from rural exile, the actual experience carried complexity of genuine connection being stretched rather than simply concluded. 6 months later, the Hayes Hartfield Agricultural Partnership had exceeded even optimistic projections, with 27 independent farms participating in the cooperative genetics program. Thunderhead's premium bloodline had produced exactly the quality improvements Sam had predicted, while additional breeding stock acquired through Hayes' investment had expanded available genetic diversity beyond what individual farms could have. Accessed independently, Consolidated Agricultural Holdings had adapted their strategy in response, shifting from acquisition to competition, establishing rival programs that mimicked partnership elements while maintaining corporate control. The modified approach represented strategic victory for the regional farming community, forcing predatory practices to evolve toward more equitable models to remain competitive. Alexander had established a functional balance between worlds, maintaining an apartment in Riverdale County for his 3-day weekends of partnership involvement, while operating from Manhattan during corporate weekdays. The arrangement created ongoing tension between contexts, but also productive cross-pollination of perspectives that benefited both environments. His transformation remained evident to those who had known him before. Colleagues at Hayes Technology noted his evolved approach to leadership and purpose, while his former social circle found him increasingly disconnected from purely status-driven pursuits. Some relationships had fallen away as natural consequence of changed priorities, while others had adapted to his new integration of privilege and purpose. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Alexander stood beside Sam at the edge of Hartfield's North Field, watching harvest operations with the practiced assessment he'd developed during his summer immersion. The rhythmic movement of equipment across golden fields represented not just agricultural process, but metaphor for cycles of growth, maturity, and renewed possibility. "Your father tells me you've declined the Singapore division leadership," Sam observed, his tone neutral rather than judgmental. "Said you're focusing on agricultural technology applications instead." Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The Singapore position would have been prestigious, lucrative, and entirely disconnected from what matters most to me now. The agricultural division offers less status, but more meaningful impact." Sam studied the young man beside him, still recognizably the privileged heir to billions, but fundamentally transformed in his relationship to that privilege. What had begun as punishment had evolved into purpose. What had been intended as humbling had become humility, not rejection of advantage, but rather its redirection toward constructive application. "Wasn't what your father expected when he sent you here," Sam observed with characteristic understatement. "Nor what I expected," Alex acknowledged, "but sometimes the most valuable harvests are the ones you didn't intentionally plant." As evening approached, they walked together toward the farmhouse where Lawrence and Emma were reviewing the partnership's quarterly performance. Their footsteps fell naturally in rhythm, the billionaire's son and the fourth-generation farmer moving in sync across land that had nearly become corporate casualty, but now represented seedbed for alternative possibilities. Behind them, the season's final harvest continued, gathering not just crops, but the fruits of transformed perspective, purposeful collaboration, and the recognition that meaningful growth often emerges from unexpected fields. Alexander Hayes, heir to technological billions and graduate of rural immersion, carried within him the integrated wisdom of both worlds, no longer defined solely by inherited privilege nor limited by singular perspective, but rather enriched by connection to the fundamental realities that sustain all human endeavor, regardless of wealth or status. What had begun as punishment had harvested something far more valuable than temporary humility. It had cultivated purpose that would continue growing long after the summer sun had faded into memory. 5 years had passed since that fateful summer when Alexander Hayes, heir to the Hayes technology fortune, had arrived at Hartfield Farm in dirt-stained designer sneakers and entitled Indignation. The landscape of Riverdale County had transformed significantly during that time, not through corporate consolidation, as Consolidated Agricultural Holdings had planned, but through the expanding influence of the Hayes-Hartfield partnership that had begun as an improvised auction strategy and evolved into a regional agricultural revolution. On a warm June morning, remarkably similar to the day of his initial arrival, Alexander stood on the crest of Hartfield's East Ridge, surveying the patchwork of thriving farms that stretched toward the horizon. Unlike the reluctant exile who had viewed these same fields as prison 5 years earlier, the 30-year-old man who stood there now saw the land with the complex appreciation of someone who understood its ecological, economic, and community significance. His appearance had changed substantially, designer clothes permanently replaced by practical attire that bridged rural functionality and urban professional requirements. His body maintained the hardened fitness of someone who still participated in genuine physical labor despite corporate responsibilities. Most transformed was his expression, the practiced charm and dismissive superiority replaced by authentic engagement and purposeful focus. "Some view," observed Emma Hartfield as she joined him on the ridge. At 39, she'd maintained her no-nonsense demeanor while developing additional dimensions as the partnership's director of veterinary services, overseeing genetic programs that had revolutionized regional breeding practices. Their relationship had evolved from antagonistic supervision to professional collaboration to genuine friendship, and recently to something more complex that neither had fully articulated. "Amazing what 5 years of coordinated effort can accomplish," Alex agreed, gesturing toward the verdant valley where 73 independent farms now participated in their cooperative model. "When I stood here 5 years ago, I couldn't see beyond my own inconvenience. Now I see interconnected systems that support thousands of lives." Emma smiled slightly at the philosophical observation, a quality that had emerged gradually in Alex as his perspective expanded beyond immediate self-interest. "Your father just arrived at the main house. The investors are assembling for the announcement. Today marked a significant milestone for the Hayes-Hartfield partnership, the official launch of their Rural Innovation Fund, a $50 million investment vehicle dedicated to agricultural technology applications specifically designed for independent farm operations. Unlike conventional agribusiness investment that prioritized corporate-scale implementation, their fund focused on innovations that preserved family farm viability while improving sustainability and productivity. The initiative represented Alexander's most ambitious integration of his dual worlds, leveraging Hayes Technologies' financial resources and innovation capabilities while maintaining commitment to agricultural independence and community resilience. The fund's structure reflected 5 years of evolving understanding, creating pathways for technological advancement that enhanced rather than eliminated human connection to land and community. As they walked together toward the farmhouse, now renovated to serve as the partnership's headquarters while maintaining its historical character, the contrast with Alex's first trek down this same path was striking. What had once felt like exile had become purpose. What had been punishment had transformed into passion. "Nervous?" Emma asked, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders. "A little," Alex admitted with the genuine self-awareness that had gradually replaced his defensive facade. "Today represents the largest test yet of whether my two worlds can truly integrate meaningfully." The philosophical vulnerability would have been unimaginable from the Alexander who had arrived 5 years earlier, convinced of his superiority and focused exclusively on escape. That evolution, from performative confidence masking insecurity to authentic strength acknowledging limitations, perhaps best represented his fundamental transformation. The farmhouse kitchen, once the site of Alex's reluctant introduction to farm life, had been thoughtfully preserved amid the building's renovation. The worn oak table remained centerpiece of the space, though it now hosted partnership strategy sessions rather than simply family meals. Around it gathered representatives from diverse stakeholders, independent farmers, agricultural researchers, technology developers, and investment partners, all assembled for the fund's formal announcement. Lawrence Hayes stood among them, now 63, but carrying his age with the vigor of someone whose purpose had evolved rather than diminished. His relationship with Alexander had transformed profoundly during the past 5 years, from the authoritarian father imposing punitive lessons to collaborative partner respecting his son's distinct vision while contributing complementary expertise. Lawrence greeted him with the simple warmth that had gradually replaced their former formality. The investment committee is impressed with the final framework. Davis Agricultural Tech has already committed to matching the initial funding. The practical update reflected their evolved communication, focused on shared purpose rather than familial authority or obligation. What began as punitive sentence had unexpectedly transformed both Hayes men, creating genuine partnership neither could have anticipated. Sam Hartfield, now 67 and semi-retired from daily operations while remaining central to strategic guidance, observed this interaction with quiet satisfaction. His gamble on the entitled city boy 5 years earlier had yielded returns far beyond financial metrics, transforming not just Alexander, but an entire regional agricultural approach. "Before we begin the formal announcement," Sam said as the group assembled completely, "I'd like to acknowledge the journey that brought us here." His weathered face carried the wisdom of decades farming the same land his great-grandfather had worked. 5 years ago, an unlikely summer placement created unexpected partnership between worlds that had grown dangerously disconnected: corporate innovation and agricultural tradition, urban efficiency and rural resilience. The gathered representatives nodded in acknowledgement, many having witnessed the partnership's evolution from seemingly impulsive auction strategy to regional agricultural framework that had successfully countered corporate consolidation while improving independent farm viability. What began as Lawrence Hayes's attempt to teach his son humility through manual labor, Sam continued with gentle humor, somehow evolved into something none of us anticipated. A model that preserves agricultural independence through collaborative innovation rather than competitive consolidation. Alexander listened with complex emotion as Sam recounted their journey. From the livestock auction, where he had impulsively bid $60,000 for Thunderhead, to the gradually expanding cooperative that now encompassed 73 farms across 4 counties. The narrative carried none of the embarrassment he might once have felt at reminders of his entitled beginnings, instead highlighting the authentic transformation that had occurred through unexpected immersion in agricultural reality. When Sam concluded his introduction, Alexander stepped forward to outline the Rural Innovation Fund's framework, a carefully constructed investment vehicle that would identify and develop agricultural technologies specifically designed for independent farm implementation. Unlike conventional agribusiness innovation that assumed corporate scale and standardization, their approach prioritized adaptability to diverse operations while maintaining community ownership of essential resources. The fundamental premise of this fund, Alex explained, with the confident clarity he had developed over 5 years bridging disparate worlds, is that technological advancement doesn't require corporate consolidation. Innovation can enhance independent, agricultural viability rather than eliminating it. If we intentionally design with community resilience as core principle rather than afterthought. As he detailed the fund's operational structure and investment criteria, observers familiar with both Hayes men noted how Alexander had integrated his father's strategic brilliance with Sam's grounded pragmatism, creating something that honored both influences while establishing distinct vision. The entitled heir, who had arrived at Hartfield Farm, viewing manual labor as beneath his dignity, had evolved into someone capable of synthesizing diverse perspectives into coherent frameworks that served multiple communities simultaneously. Following the formal presentation and subsequent discussion, the gathering transitioned to a celebratory lunch in the renovated barn. The structure where Alexander had first encountered the physical demands of genuine agricultural work now transformed into elegant event space that honored its historical function while accommodating contemporary needs. The renovation metaphorically represented their entire approach, preserving essential agricultural traditions while thoughtfully integrating modern innovations. As conversations flowed among diverse stakeholders, Emma approached Lawrence Hayes, who stood somewhat apart observing the interactions with analytical interest. "Not quite what you had in mind when you dropped him off 5 years ago," she observed with characteristic directness. Lawrence smiled slightly, acknowledging the understatement. "I expected him to learn basic work ethic and perhaps develop minimal appreciation for practical labor. I never anticipated." He gestured toward Alex, who was engaged in detailed discussion with a multi-generational farming family about technology implementation challenges. This fundamental redirection of purpose. The summer sentence became life sentence, Emma noted with subtle humor. "In the best possible way," Lawrence agreed. His expression shifted to something more personally reflective. "Alexandra, his mother, would have been proud of this version of our son. She always believed wealth was only meaningful when connected to genuine purpose." The rare mention of Alexander's deceased mother created momentary emotional depth in their otherwise practical conversation. Emma had learned through occasional references that Alexandra Hayes had died when Alex was 14. Creating fracture in the family dynamic that had never fully healed until recent years. "He mentioned once that she's the reason you established the original Hayes Foundation focus on rural education," Emma said, recalling a conversation from the previous year when Alexander had revealed more of his family history. Lawrence nodded, uncharacteristically transparent about personal matters. She grew up in a farming community in western Pennsylvania, never lost her connection to agricultural values despite our eventual wealth. After she died, I buried myself in corporate expansion rather than maintaining the community connections she had valued. His gaze returned to Alexander. Perhaps my sending him to Hartfield Farm was unconscious attempt to restore something I had allowed to diminish after her death. The personal revelation demonstrated Lawrence's own evolution, from the controlling father imposing punitive measures to someone capable of genuine self-reflection and acknowledgement of complex motivations. The summer that had transformed Alexander had ultimately catalyzed changes throughout the interconnected relationships surrounding him. Across the barn, Alexander found himself in conversation with Marcus Whitfield, the same consolidated agricultural holdings executive who had attempted to derail their partnership through aggressive acquisition offers 5 years earlier. Corporate consolidation efforts had evolved significantly since their initial confrontation, forced to adapt to the viable alternative the Hayes-Hartfield partnership had established. "You've built something impressive," Whitfield acknowledged, with professional respect, if not full conversion to their philosophy. Consolidated initially viewed your approach as idealistic distraction from economic realities. 5 years of sustained growth suggests we underestimated its viability. Different metrics of success, Alex replied without the combative edge that might have characterized earlier interactions. Corporate consolidation optimizes for quarterly returns and shareholder value. Our model optimizes for community resilience and distributed prosperity. Both approaches can generate returns. They just define returns differently. The nuanced perspective reflected Alexander's evolved understanding, not rejecting business principles, but rather expanding their application beyond purely financial metrics. The entitled heir, who had measured worth exclusively through wealth accumulation, had developed capacity to recognize value in community connection, environmental sustainability, and purpose beyond profit. Hayes Technologies' involvement legitimized what might otherwise have remained fringe agricultural philosophy, Whitfield observed analytically. Your father's investment infrastructure combined with Hartfield's agricultural credibility created implementation pathway conventional financing. Wouldn't have supported integration of complementary perspectives, Alex agreed. Neither corporate efficiency nor agricultural tradition alone could have achieved this outcome. The synthesis created possibility that specialized silos would have missed. As their conversation continued, the philosophical underpinning of Alexander's transformation became increasingly evident. Not rejection of his privileged background, but rather its thoughtful integration with agricultural understanding, creating a bridge between worlds that had grown dangerously disconnected through specialized isolation. Later that afternoon, as the formal gathering concluded and participants departed toward their diverse destinations, Alexander found himself once again on the farmhouse porch, where he had spent countless evenings during his transformative summer. The familiar rocking chairs still occupied their places, though the porch itself had been carefully restored as part of the headquarters renovation. Sam joined him there, the similarity to their early evening conversations 5 years earlier creating momentary time compression despite all that had evolved between then and now. They rocked in companionable silence for several minutes, the rhythmic creaking against wooden planks providing meditative backdrop for reflection. Did you ever imagine this outcome when my father first contacted you about taking me for the summer? Alex finally asked, genuine curiosity rather than self-congratulation in his tone. Sam considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I expected you might develop basic appreciation for manual labor if you survived the full 3 months, he admitted. The partnership concept, the regional implementation, the technology fund, those possibilities weren't even remotely on my radar. Nor mine, Alex acknowledged with self-deprecating humor. I was just trying to avoid embarrassing myself with the manure spreader. They shared a moment of genuine laughter at the reference to one of Alexander's early farm disasters, when his attempt to operate equipment he didn't understand had resulted in spectacularly messy outcome that had required hours of cleanup. The memory that might once have triggered defensive embarrassment now represented simply one milestone in his gradual development of agricultural competence. Your father mentioned something interesting today, Sam said after their laughter subsided. Said he believes your mother somehow guided his decision to send you here specifically, that reconnecting you with agricultural values was an unconscious attempt to honor her background. Alex absorbed this perspective with visible emotion. She used to talk about her grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania, the connection to seasons, the community interdependence. After she died, those conversations faded from family discourse. Dad focused exclusively on technological advancement while I pursued superficial status symbols. He gazed across the fields, illuminated by late afternoon sunlight. Perhaps we both needed reconnection to something she had valued, that we had lost. The philosophical reflection demonstrated another dimension of Alexander's evolution, capacity for emotional depth and family healing that had been buried beneath defensive privilege for years before his Hartfield farm immersion. The entitled heir's transformation had ultimately created ripples that affected his relationship not just with his father, but with his deceased mother's memory and values. As evening approached, bringing familiar transition from work to contemplation that characterized agricultural rhythms, Lawrence Hayes joined them on the porch. The three men, representing different generations, backgrounds, and life paths, had developed unlikely connection through their shared creation of the partnership that now influenced regional agricultural practice. The investors were impressed with the fund structure, Lawrence noted, naturally focusing on practical outcomes. Davis Agricultural committed another $20 million beyond their initial match, bringing total capitalization to $90 million for first-phase implementation. More importantly, Alex added, demonstrating his evolved perspective, 4 multi-generational farming families who were considering selling to corporate interests have decided to maintain independence with fund support. The financial metrics matter, but the community preservation remains core purpose. Lawrence nodded, accepting this prioritization that might once have seemed irrational to his corporate mindset. Your mother would have framed it exactly that way, he acknowledged quietly. The mention created momentary connection among all three men. Alexandra Hayes's values somehow present in their collaborative creation, despite her physical absence. Her influence had ultimately shaped all their paths in ways none could have anticipated, creating unexpected legacy through their integrated approach to agricultural preservation. As darkness settled over Hartfield Farm, Emma joined them on the porch, completing the core quartet whose diverse perspectives had shaped the partnership's evolution. The comfortable silence that developed among them would have been unimaginable during Alexander's early days of entitled indignation and defensive privilege. What began as punishment had somehow cultivated the very qualities his father had hoped to develop, though through organic growth rather than imposed humiliation. 5 years ago today, Emma noted, breaking the contemplative quiet, a Bentley pulled up that driveway and deposited the most entitled trust fund case I'd ever encountered. If someone had described today's gathering as the eventual outcome, I'd have questioned their sanity. Fair assessment, Alex acknowledged, with genuine humor rather than defensive pride. Though in my defense, those dairy cows were legitimately intimidating to someone whose only previous animal experience involved designer dog breeds. The self-deprecating comment triggered collective laughter, the shared reference to his early ineptitude representing how far their relationships had evolved. What began as antagonistic supervision had transformed through genuine respect into collaborative partnership, and for Alexander and Emma specifically, into something more personal that continued developing with characteristic practical patience. As evening deepened into night, their conversation drifted through partnership plans, fund implementation details, and eventually to more personal reflections on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. The entitled heir's summer sentence had somehow catalyzed transformation that extended far beyond individual character development, creating innovative framework that preserved agricultural traditions through thoughtful integration with technological advancement. When Lawrence eventually departed for his overnight accommodations in town, and Sam retired to his private quarters in the renovated East Wing, Alexander and Emma remained on the porch, their conversation shifting to more personal territory than partnership operations. Davis's additional investment creates implementation capacity beyond our initial projections, Alex noted, still processing the day's developments. We could accelerate the technology adaptation protocols for smaller operations significantly. Emma studied him with affectionate exasperation. Is discussing fund capitalization your idea of romantic evening conversation, Hayes? The day's partnership meetings focused on rural innovation fund implementation, determining evaluation criteria for agricultural technologies that would receive development support. Unlike conventional investment approaches that prioritized scalability for corporate implementation, their framework emphasized adaptability to diverse operations, accessibility for independent farmers, and integration with existing agricultural knowledge rather than its replacement. Alexander led these discussions with the curious integration of corporate strategic thinking and agricultural practical awareness that characterized his evolved perspective. The entitled youth, who had viewed farm assignment as punishment beneath his dignity, had developed capacity to synthesize diverse viewpoints into cohesive frameworks that served multiple communities simultaneously. Lawrence participated actively, yet respectfully, contributing technological insights without dominating discussions that incorporated agricultural expertise beyond his experience. Their father-son dynamic had transformed profoundly, from authoritarian punishment to collaborative partnership based on complementary perspectives rather than hierarchical authority. The technology selection criteria need particular attention. To implementation scale, Lawrence noted during discussion of evaluation frameworks. Corporate agricultural innovation typically assumes standardized conditions across massive operations. Independent farms require adaptability to diverse circumstances with minimal support infrastructure. Exactly, Alex agreed, building on his father's observation. We're essentially reversing conventional development approach, designing for small-scale implementation with adaptation pathways rather than standardized scale requiring conformity. Emma contributed veterinary science perspective on genetic monitoring protocols, while Sam provided practical insight regarding implementation challenges from farmer viewpoint. The diverse expertise converging around shared purpose represented exactly the collaborative approach their partnership promoted throughout the regional agricultural community. As the day's meetings concluded and participants dispersed toward various responsibilities, Alexander found himself momentarily alone with his father in the farmhouse kitchen, the space where his transformation had begun 5 years earlier with reluctant introduction to farm expectations and boundaries. "Quite a evolution from your first day here," Lawrence observed, the simple statement carrying significant acknowledgement of Alexander's transformation. From entitled resistance to purposeful integration, Alex agreed. Though not the specific trajectory you anticipated when you arranged my summer sentence, Lawrence smiled slightly, his corporate precision momentarily yielding to paternal pride. Parenting outcomes rarely align with initial strategic projections. Adaptation to unexpected developments determine success more reliably than rigid adherence to original plans. The business terminology applied to personal relationship reflected Lawrence's own evolution, maintaining his analytical nature while developing capacity for emotional connection that had diminished following his wife's death. The summer that had transformed Alexander had ultimately catalyzed healing throughout their family system, creating space for authentic relationship beyond authority and rebellion dynamics. Mom would have appreciated the agricultural connection, Alex noted, continuing the emotional openness that had gradually developed between them. Her Pennsylvania farm roots finding expression through unexpected pathway. Alexandra always understood interconnection between seemingly disparate elements, Lawrence acknowledged, rare vulnerability evident in his willingness to discuss his deceased wife. She saw patterns connecting technological advancement and traditional knowledge, when most observers perceived only opposition between them. This shared reflection on Alexandra Hayes created momentary bond between father and son that transcended their complex history of control, rebellion, and eventual collaboration. The summer punishment had somehow facilitated healing that extended beyond individual character development to family reconciliation and purposeful alignment. That evening, as sunset painted Hartfield Farm in golden light, remarkably similar to Alexander's first evening 5 years earlier, he stood on the East Ridge where his transformation had begun. The vantage point that had initially represented the boundaries of his rural prison, now offering perspective on interconnected systems. His entitled perspective had once rendered invisible. Emma joined him there, their shoulders touching slightly as they surveyed the landscape their partnership had helped preserve from corporate consolidation. The physical contact carried comfort of developed trust rather than romantic drama, authentic connection built through years of collaborative purpose rather than superficial attraction. "Full circle moment?" she asked, intuiting the reflective quality of his contemplation. "Considering I spent my first evening here plotting elaborate escape strategies," Alex acknowledged with self-aware humor, "standing here voluntarily 5 years later definitely represents deviation from anticipated outcomes." "Life sentences sometimes become life purposes," Emma observed, with philosophical insight rarely expressed but deeply characteristic of her practical wisdom. "Your father's punishment accidentally connected you with something you're privileged. Existence had obscured, but never eliminated, capacity for purpose beyond self-interest." The observation captured essential truth about Alexander's transformation. Not rejection of inherited advantage, but rather its redirection toward meaningful application. The entitled heir had discovered unexpected fulfillment through connection to agricultural reality that balanced rather than replaced his corporate capabilities, creating integrated perspective that neither world alone could have provided. As darkness settled over Hartfield Farm, partnership headquarters transitioned from daytime strategic activity to evening contemplative quiet. The rhythmic cycles of agricultural life, morning labor, daylight strategic work, evening reflection, had become integral to Alexander's existence despite his continued corporate responsibilities and urban connections. The entitled youth who had arrived viewing farm assignment as punishment beneath his dignity had discovered that meaningful purpose often emerges from unexpected sources, that genuine fulfillment requires connection to fundamental realities sustaining human existence, beneath superficial status concerns. His forced summer labor had somehow yielded harvest beyond financial metrics or status symbols, cultivating capacity for authentic relationship with land, community, and purpose that transcended wealth accumulation. 5 years after his chauffeur-driven arrival at Hartfield Farm, Alexander Hayes had completed transformation from entitled heir to purposeful leader, not through rejection of privilege, but through its thoughtful integration with agricultural understanding. The metaphorical seeds planted during that summer of discontent had yielded ongoing harvest of meaningful connection between worlds that had grown dangerously disconnected through specialized isolation. What began as punishment had ultimately revealed purpose. What started as sentence had somehow become salvation. The unexpected journey from entitled resistance to purposeful integration had transformed not just Alexander, but the entire agricultural landscape surrounding him, creating living testimony to the possibility that privilege, when connected to purpose beyond self-interest, might serve rather than exploit the communities sustaining it. As lights illuminated farmhouse windows against gathering darkness, the Hayes-Hartfield Partnership headquarters represented physical manifestation of this possibility, technological innovation and agricultural tradition integrated through purposeful collaboration rather than competitive dominance. The billionaire's son, who had once viewed manual labor as beneath his dignity, had discovered that meaningful connection often requires hands in soil rather than simply money in markets. That authentic purpose emerges through integration of privilege with responsibility rather than its isolation from fundamental realities. The transformation had come full circle, returning Alexander Hayes not to his starting point, but rather to authentic self that privileged isolation had obscured rather than created. His summer sentence had ultimately yielded freedom more profound than entitled consumption had ever provided. The liberation of purpose, connecting personal advantage to community benefit rather than merely individual acquisition. As night settled, completely over Hartfield Farm, the contrast with Alexander's first evening 5 years earlier could not have been more pronounced. The reluctant exile counting hours until escape now willingly present in previously rejected context, finding fulfillment through integration of worlds he had once perceived as irreconcilably separate. His forced summer labor had somehow yielded harvest beyond financial metrics or status symbols, cultivating capacity for authentic relationship with land, community, and purpose that would continue producing fruit long after that initial season of discontent had faded into memory.